Now, gender activists are calling on President Cyril Ramaphosa to use tonight's State of the Nation address to announce concrete measures to tackle gender-based violence. This comes days after 2 life sentences were handed down to Lungile Xelelwa by the Palm Springs Magistrate Court for the murder and rape of his girlfriend, Gineilwe Pule of Sebokeng. Joining us now on our social justice panel are Cristianne Wendler, a gender-based violence manager at Shout It Now, alongside Isobel Frye of the Studies into Poverty and Inequality Institute, and also by the chairperson of the Unemployed People's Forum, Ayanda Kota, and human rights activist Mark Haywood. Very good afternoon to all of you. Certainly a lot of expectations tonight regarding the president and what it is that we hope that he will be addressing. But perhaps if we start with you, Cristianne, now that you are here with us, is government doing enough as far as tackling issues of, I guess, HIV and AIDS? I know there has been a lot of controversy around a lot of other ailments being sidelined in the midst of COVID-19. And we know last year the president really did touch a lot on the progress that has been done in the area of HIV AIDS as far as testing is concerned, how many people are actually on antiretrovirals. But is this enough? Where do we stand now?
Well, it's a big question, a very subjective question, and that answer could be very heavily debated. But we have to look at where we currently stand is we have 19% of the global HIV burden in the world is here in South Africa. And so this is a monumental task to address this that cannot be solved by government alone. So it is very important that, yes, we need to call on government. Are they doing enough? A lot of people don't realize that, of course, with the largest HIV burden, we also have the largest antiretroviral program in the world, which the government funds. And treatment is absolutely critical. And if we're able to get people on treatment, if they're able to adhere and achieve viral suppression through their treatment adherence, we can prevent the spread of HIV. And unfortunately, one of the main reasons people don't adhere to treatment and achieve, therefore, viral suppression is stigma and discrimination. And that is in families, that is in communities, and that is in workplaces. And so that's not a problem that government alone can solve. It's important that we, as all of us, organizations like ours, Shout It Now, in the spaces we work, all of us as individuals in our communities, we need to be supportive to individuals who are positive, to access treatment, to be able to adhere. And that's an important part that we need to address in addition to what government is doing.
Do you think it's important enough a topic, an issue for government or the president to actually mention tonight in this year's State of the Nation address?
Absolutely. HIV is a critical health issue in South Africa. As I say, we are by far the largest burden in the world. And so we cannot be complacent or let that slip. Some people have said we have HIV fatigue. People are tired about talking about it. We can't. Stigma is still rife. We need to address it. We need to ensure that health commodities, the treatment is available. We need to make sure that health service providers are trained and supported to offer HIV support and treatment, and all the prevention programs that we need to roll. And all of that is critical. We cannot be complacent, and so we very much hope that the president will address this tonight.
Let me pose my next question to you, Ms. Isobel Frye. And perhaps this is also one of those areas where we cannot say too much about it. We cannot reach a point where we are complacent when we talk about issues of inequality and poverty. The fact that South Africa is perhaps one of the most unequal countries in the world. Almost 50% of South Africans are said to be poor. But what would you say are the drivers of the large inequality gap that exists in South Africa?
Thanks, Tammy, and thanks. I think hosting this panel is a really good idea on the brink of the State of the Nation address. Your previous speaker spoke about HIV/AIDS fatigue, and I think that when you come to headlines and chatter in classes, possibly poverty and inequality appear to be quite tiresome things as well, because they just won't go away. But that really is because they are at the heart of the structural inequalities. Before the break, Jimmy, your economist, was talking about the need for structural adjustment, structural reforms. And for many people who take the long view of where South Africa is going, the fact that there was no massive redistribution of the accumulated apartheid wealth on the eve or just after the launch of our democracy was not understandable. So basically, you ask about the drivers of poverty and inequality. And so notwithstanding the most radical constitution that we have in the world, with the potential to really bring about the seismic kind of change that we needed to move from apartheid to liberation, that hasn't been done. So a huge amount of wealth is locked in the hands of very few. So that's asset wealth. And that's what's known as idle wealth. It's not being used to go into the manufacturing, the kind of production that we need in order to stimulate the development of jobs. And so you have an increasing number of people who are outside of the labor market, who can't be brought in by a few public works jobs. We've got more people, as my article in the Daily Maverick today said, who are outside of the employment market than are formally employed or formally unemployed. Now, one of the things that we really are demanding is that the states reintroduce the social relief of distress grants, and whether that's announced in the State of the Nation address tonight would be, I think, a clear indication of whether the kinds of recovery that we could hope for will be built on a proper foundation or not, because we cannot have millions of people just ignored. When we talk about the economy and we talk about the binding constraints, we also read about, for instance, the 378 billion rand that Treasury found unexpectedly that they were sitting on in terms of additional cash in January. So what is the real economy? Is the real economy the kinds of macroeconomic theories, or is it everybody's reality that needs to be addressed collectively going forward?
And you spoke there about implementation and the fact that we've got a very progressive constitution. And this is to you once again, Isobel. If we look back at the National Development Plan of 2012, one of the main objectives and one of the main mandates for that plan is to ensure that poverty is alleviated by 2030. Looking at the plan itself, is it being implemented? What it proposes as the measures to address inequality, are those enough? Where are the gaps?
I think if you recall back to 2012, there was a lot of talk about the vision and the dream ahead of the plan. The plan itself lacks much detail, and I think the problem with our approaches in South Africa is that we like seeing what we want to achieve without acknowledging what we should achieve. Now, if you look at the indicators, poverty has actually risen since 2012 significantly. What the plan relied on was that unemployment would be reduced and hence income poverty would be relaxed because people would be earning. Now, we've also seen the complete opposite of that. Unemployment has not fallen, and it can't fall because the kinds of steps that are required in terms of reindustrialization, in terms of promoting activities that generate jobs is not happening. So instead of saying, we keep on headlining the fact that we're in a fourth industrial revolution, things have not changed. What do we do with people where they are right now? We keep on saying it'll be great to have cities of sort of gleaming spires and high-tech revolutions without saying people are currently on street corners, unemployed. What do we do? So I would say the National Development Plan was a good initiative, and we need to revisit it as the state is doing. But we need to revisit it with looking at what we have, not scenario planning, not the kinds of clever tricks to try. I mean, if you look at, for instance, at Stats SA, what they've started doing in terms of unemployment is through manipulation of categories. People are moved out of unemployment without actually finding jobs. So you exist in this lacuna. You're not employed, you're not unemployed, but you're certainly not working, you're not earning money. So what we do know is we know where people are, and we know that people need to make their basic needs. We know that if you want to shock this and kickstart the economy, you need to give money to people so they have purchasing power, so that they can start, we can start the economy from the bottom up. The question of implementation and that's really micro. So we also need to look at where is the burden of this debt. If you look at the macroeconomic policies, we keep on talking about the need to stimulate growth on that, but we also need to look at monetary policy. Why are we not printing more money effectively? Why are we not looking at quantitative easing in order to get ourselves out of this debt? And certainly in terms of fiscal reforms, we need to be looking at taxing so that we release the wealth. So that for wealthy people, it is more painful to sit on your wealth than it is to release it for proper use.
I'd like to direct the next question to you, Mr. Ayanda Kota, on the back of what Isobel has just spoken about. She said that we need to have activities that create jobs. Now, how do we actually do this? What is it that the president ought to be saying and doing to effect this? In a country where 2.2 million people lost jobs in the second quarter of last year, where 4.3 million people are unemployed, where 20 million are economically not active, and in an economy that shrunk 51% between March and June of 2020, what is it that the president needs to put in place that will actually drive job creation in this country?
Well, thank you very much. I think there is no commitment on the part of the government to address the unemployment in this country. As you are correctly pointing out, that only during this period of COVID, more than 2 million jobs were lost. I think, to me, it's no longer a question what we should expect from the government. I think, to me, it's no longer a question from the maiden speech of the president. I think, to me, the question is what are the people of this country doing? And because it is the people of this country, in particular the black working class, that bear the brunt of the unemployment, that know that ought to be the question. We need to change the narrative. If we expected the government or the ruling party to do anything for our people, I think we will continue to wait and wait and wait. You would remember the first maiden speech of the President Ramaphosa, where he made a commitment to create jobs. He made a commitment to grow the economy. He inspired our people and injected hope. But we are living in a state of despair. The economy is not growing, it is stagnant. The unemployment, there's a bloodbath out there. Millions, not less than 1 million of our people are unemployed. So I think for us to expect anything, it would be naive for us to expect any commitment or anything from President Ramaphosa. He will just be narrating a poem without any commitment to do any other thing. So he will be just reading us a commitment. It will be, even if you look at the ruling party, I mean, he's surrounded by gangsters in his top six, in the names of these Mahashulas of this world, in the name of Jesse Duarte of this world. So the real question should be, what are the people of this country doing? Because we cannot wait forever. More than 20 years is enough that we have suffered. The unemployment is growing, people are hungry, the inequalities are soaring. So I think the people of this country, we all need to stand up and say enough is enough. We need to fight back.
From what I'm hearing you say, Mr. Kota, I mean, you were quite harsh towards the top six there, calling them gangsters, that being, I guess, your opinion and where you see them. Are you then saying that you have no hope in the ANC government? Are you then saying that you don't believe that there's capacity within this particular government to effect meaningful change?
How do you people's money during the COVID time, when people are quite sick, when people need water, when people need the PPEs, and they are stealing those money. And in stealing those money, they are switching off the lifeline machines in the hospitals. By stealing those money, they are killing our people in numbers. So you can't hold people who are stealing the health of our people away, because by doing that, they are killing our people. You cannot continue to hold people. I mean, COVID, this COVID and the theft of the massive theft at a very massive scale of the PPE's money exposed the failures of the African National Congress and its government. So you can no longer expect us to trust that government. The municipalities are dysfunctional. They are not doing anything for our people. This country is in flames. All the communities are standing up trying to fight back.
I think we'll leave it at that for now, Mr. Kota. And on the back of the comment that was made by Mr. Kota, I'd like to come to you, Mr. Mark Haywood. You know, Ayanda speaks about a deficit trust, or a deficit in trust. We actually had a student as well who was being interviewed by one of our reporters who said, we are languishing in hopelessness. We are being taught and we see that hard work does not pay. That was a quote by a student regarding his situation and the way that he sees the state of South Africa now. Let me ask you, sir, what do you think are some of the social ills, perhaps, that are not as highlighted in this country that also contribute to social ill? And I guess, you know, psychological issues play a huge part in that as well. The impact and the effects of stories of corruption and what that does to a society.
Yeah, let me first say that I can only agree with Ayanda Kota. Each year, the president promises high and delivers very low. And poor people have hopes and expectations raised, but those hopes are never delivered on. And in fact, in an article that I published today in Maverick Citizen, what we said was that this year civil society has no expectations of the picture that people are witnessing is of declining quality of public education, declining quality of public health, continuation of gender-based violence, increased hunger. And therefore, what we really need at this COVID moment is for the president and the government to completely change approach policy making and put poor people at the center of delivery, as Isobel Frye said, to tap into the wealth that is being people, to create jobs for services that are needed in this country, to stimulate an economy that exists and can be brought into being, but is being held back by business behavior and by government behavior at this moment in time. But I'm afraid that the only way we're going to get this is when people take to the streets and demand what is their rights in the Constitution. You started out by talking about the Constitution, our supreme law, let us remember. The Constitution says that social justice is the cornerstone of South Africa, that people have a right to equality, that people have a right to dignity. And it doesn't just say those as nice wishes. It says that because government is meant to organize its planning and its budgeting and its delivery around what the Constitution says. And it's because of failure to respect the Constitution that we have these hidden things that you're talking about. And you mentioned it. We have a mental health crisis in our country that is not recognized. We have a crisis of infant malnutrition in our country. We have a substance abuse crisis, whether it's alcohol, whether it's tick, whether it's nyope, whatever it may be. We have a perfect storm of social ills that are unfortunately just getting wider and deeper because we're addressing those social ills squarely. And I think the challenge is, how do you get the economy to begin to work in a way that helps to realize human rights rather than away from rights realization?
And I'd like to pick up on that point and address the next question to you, Cristianne Wendler. We saw the president in the speech in 2020 at his SONA talking about a reprioritization of 1.6 billion rand to go towards gender-based violence for the emergency action plan and the implementation of that. Have we seen results? Have you seen the fruits of that 1.6 billion rand a year down the line?
Unfortunately, where it comes to gender-based violence, we haven't. We have an absolute growing, enormous epidemic of gender-based violence. And as many of the other panelists have discussed, none of these issues exist in isolation. So we can't address HIV unless we're addressing the impacts of gender-based violence within the context of HIV. We can't address poverty, unemployment without looking at HIV and gender-based violence. These are all connected things, and it does, I echo all the other panelists, it does come down to implementation. We can talk about great plans. We have spoken about great plans, but it is important that we now focus on what are the concrete steps that we take to get there. And that needs to come from a national level, that needs to come from provincial, local, down to district, and organizations such as ours very much being a part of that, of how do we assist government, how are we all working towards the same end? Because until we have a GBV-free society, until we do not have new infections of HIV, until we do not have young people without access to education, until we address the substance abuse issue that has been raised, these are all impacted, and they ultimately negatively impact South African society. We can't realize our full potential without these. And so we do need to really focus on implementation, and gender-based violence, in my opinion, and certainly looking at the statistics, is an absolutely massive epidemic.
Is throwing money at the problem going to solve it?
Money is always important. You can't implement without funding. Throwing money at the problem, money alone is not enough. No, we need to change. The root cause of gender-based violence is deep-seated gender imbalances that are a result of gender norms that value men over women.
It really is a social matrix, it sounds like, that we're talking about here. But as we wrap up, as we wrap up our conversation today, perhaps let me start with you, Isobel, on your hopes and your expectations of what you hope the president will cover tonight.
Yeah, I think, no, I do. I hope that the president steps up, hears what people have been saying, and looks at the inversion of priorities. So our recovery needs to start with a strong foundation, which means that every person feels included and has at least the bare basics. 350 Rand COVID grant is not enough to meet people's basic needs or to get the dignity that Mark Hayward was talking about, the Constitution delivers. But it's a sign to say that people's needs will not be silent. They will not be the ones that are relegated to the end once business feels happy to free up a few resources. So we've got to understand that the Constitution, our country, is about the majority of people, the people that Ayanda Kota was talking about. And if the president doesn't do so, the question of how people take to the streets, how activists take to the courts, needs to be the next line of march. But I do believe that the president has the intention and the political will to do so. And so my expectation is that he will deliver on that.
All right, thank you so much. I know, Mr. Ayanda Kota, you said you have no expectations of the president today. But if you were to have expectations, what would those be? Also bearing in mind that he did put forward a 5-step plan in last year's SONA and committed to putting aside 1% of the national budget to go towards youth unemployment. Are you with us, Mr. Kota?
Come again?
All right, your hopes of what you hope the president will address tonight.
Absolutely no. I think it would be naive of us to expect that there will be any change from the president's speech. I mean, what I'm saying is based on evidence of what we've witnessed and see over the last 20 years. It's not something that comes out. It's not feelings, it's not emotion. It's based on the realities. On the
stop
experience.
there. Our connection is not the best and our time is also not on our side. Mr. Hayward, from you, in 30 seconds, what you hope the president will cover tonight.
Okay, if there's only 30 seconds, a basic income grant to cover all people, and a plan to ensure that vaccines for COVID-19 reach our shores as a matter of urgency so that we can begin to vaccinate those people who are most at risk, including frontline healthcare workers within the next week or 10 days, and that we can get ahead on this COVID-19 crisis. Well, those would be my challenges.
Well, thank you so much to all of you for joining us this afternoon. That was our social justice panel. Ms. Cristianne Wendler here with us in the studio. Thank you so much for your time. A gender-based violence manager at Shout It Now. alongside Ms. Isobel Frye of the Studies into Poverty and Inequality Institute. Thank you to you, Chairperson of the Unemployed People's Forum, Mr. Ayanda Kota, and the human rights activist, Mr. Mark Haywood. Thank you for your contributions and your insights today.